There's a climactic week ahead in the war debate and the president's leadership. Other presidents who've been mired in wars with America neither winning nor losing have decided to put up the white flag. Harry Truman did it in Korea, deciding not to run again. LBJ retired after the Tet Offensive, deciding that that was the only way to make a deal with the enemy. But George W. Bush, in similar circumstances, with a war not clearly being won or lost, is staying the course. David, what makes this guy continue to fight the big fight for this war?
Certitude and an unwillingness to preside over the policy nose diving into the ground. A lot of people think that's already happened, but he will focus on the importance of how the United States gets out of Iraq, which is why one of the reasons I think he told Robert Draper that he's now an October to November guy. He wants to get past this next hurdle with Congress and put the war on a course to keep troops there basically for the rest of his presidency at 100 or 130,000 troops so that the next president will not pull out precipitously from the war.
Robert, you were given rare access to the president. Interviews, you got a lot of his trust. He talked to you about it. You wrote about his insistent optimism about the war. Optimism was basic to Bush. It came naturally to him for as long as he could remember. As commander-in-chief of an increasingly unpopular war, however, Bush's optimism grew less reflexive and more self-consciously determined. Aides heard it from him time and again. Who's going to follow a leader who says, follow me, things are going to get worse, Robert? In other words, the power of positive thinking. It's not that he knows more about what's going on in Iraq than we do. He simply wants to make it look better.
Yeah, and it has its natural limitations because it creates conditions for a credibility gap. If you're saying things are doing fine, we will win, when it appears to, and you say that over and over, against evidence to the contrary, it leads people to think that you're not in possession of the facts. And I think that's one of the things I was really surprised with, and all the time that I spent not only with the president, but people in the West Wing, how much difficulty the president has in owning up and acknowledging to mistakes being made. And this had to be elaborately orchestrated. Dan Bartlett and Josh Bolton and others getting the president to simply admit things aren't the way we hoped they would be. And I take responsibility for that. It was not a reflexive thing, ever. It had to be very, very elaborately planned.
Elizabeth, every time the president speaks, the bottom line is always, push forward, more war. I'm not walking out of this thing. No matter what he hears, what is it? What keeps him going on this front, full speed ahead?
Well, I think there is part of him that believes that it might someday work out, not during his presidency, but in the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's the big legacy issue. But also, I also think that he feels it's a terrible admission of failure if he makes the slightest noise about, well, we should have done the occupation better, we should have planned for more troops, anything. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do that.
If he doesn't know more than we know, what good is it? Well, when you talked to him in that private room and all the conservatives got in that Roosevelt room and you had a little confab with him recently, what does he tell you that he doesn't tell us?
It was all off the record, sorry. No, I'll tell you something. I actually had a moment of one-on-one with him, and I asked him just straight out, I said, how do you keep going, given the unpopularity of the war and just the general assault on his policies? And he unflinchingly says, because I know I'm right. Now, I don't know if that's a decision he made just because he can't he can't face being wrong, or if he truly, truly believes that this thing in the long run may make a difference in the world.
You know, I think that the president has focused more on the fact that in his mind, the U.S. has to have a sustained presence in this part of the world, that even if democracy in Iraq, the way he envisions it, is certainly not on the cards in his presidency, that the United States has to condition itself for a sustained presence there, and that part of his legacy will be to bring people around to that level of commitment, even in the face of failures in the execution of his policy.
You have something pretty profound in this book, among other profundities, Robert. Quote, the commanders and the troops never told him what was going wrong, just as the generals on the ground never once told the president during their regular video conferences, sir, we need more troops, not once. Does he not want the truth?
Well, he didn't create conditions where the truth could come out. I mean, he would have these secure video teleconferences with the generals, and he would ask a series of questions, but it wasn't really an honest line of questioning. He would say, can we win? Are we winning? What happens if we lose?
Do you
got
have
anything
what
you
need?
need? Military commanders aren't loath to say, very easily at least, we really need a lot of help here, Mr. President. And when he creates a conversation like that, it's not likely to come out.
But let's keep in mind, as compared to Truman and LBJ, I mean, Bush has completely changed the guard. In time, perhaps, to do something, to make some difference before it's all over. So that is a difference. I mean, McNamara didn't go until a year before LBJ was out of office.
About 6 months ago or a year, he said we needed this surge of troops in
Right.
order to give stability to Baghdad so that the politicians over there could get the job done of
Right.
unifying the country. Now we find that the politicians over there are incapable of doing that. There's better security, of course, because we have more troops there. But the purpose of the surge was political. Robert, he keeps changing the scorecard.
Well, he does somewhat, and it's interesting about the surge because when he was having his colloquies with the Iraq study group, it's clear that that's what he wanted. The study group didn't recommend that. They wanted much more a political solution. So it was actually inserted on page 83, and everybody in the administration came to learn this line saying we could, however, support, in essence, a surge. It was sort of an afterthought. It was not one of the major recommendations, but everybody in the presidency, in the Oval Office, or the West Wing, would say, aha, here indeed is the justification that the Iraq study group has provided us.
So are we fighting in the reality world or in a world of Bushes? Robert, you spent a lot of time with him. Is there another parallel universe here where the president says this is about character, my willingness to stick to my guns?
Sure.
It's not about the casualty rate. It's not about the politics of Maliki and the failures of those people to get their act together.
Right.
It's about my personal character that's at stake. Is that
Sure.
what this is about?
Well, it's not so much his character that's at stake, it's his core beliefs that are at stake. I mean, he said to me, for example, there's no need to argue about the freedom agenda. Well, some would say, actually, there is a need to argue about the freedom agenda, that it's a fine concept, but its practical application has real limits.
Sometimes there's a temptation to make this overly complicated. When we say faith, it's not just his faith in God. It's the faith in the signature, the thing that will define his presidency, which is pursuing freedom in the Middle East as a means to make the region more stable. That has not been realized. But the notion here is that somehow there's a choice for him between, you know, basically cutting his losses and pulling out and going out, which would have catastrophic consequences, according to most experts, or trying to find a way to right this somehow, to reach for some good news where he can find it. There is some right now, sufficient so that Democrats are backing off and saying, okay, well, maybe we're not going to push for an immediate deadline. So I think this is about him having faith in and in the pursuit of anything that will work here, and he's not about to turn his back on what will define, in his mind, his presidency, was taking this risk.
And in terms of changing the goalposts, there has been an unexpected outcome in Iraq because of the surge, which is that there's been no political reconciliation at the top, but it has been going on at the local level, where all of a sudden we're on the side of the Sunnis because the Sunnis hate Al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia. We have the same enemy now. So the president, in terms of changing goalposts, they're grabbing at that at the White House. This was not something they had planned.
We asked our Matthews meter, 12 our regular panelists. The president says historians can't rate his presidency till well after he's gone. So we asked the meter, in 50 years, is it possible that President Bush will be rated as an above-average president? Well, 8 say no. No way, Jose. Not even possible after 50 years. And 4 say yes, it is possible. David, you cover him. You say it's possible that this guy will come out all right in history.
Well, and the reason I say that is because it's impossible to know whether, in the immediate aftermath of the war on terror, his leadership was something that stands up over time, even though Iraq has gone the way that it's gone. You don't know how Iraq ultimately plays itself out, and whether his writing of Chapter 1 somehow pulls out of the real-time mistakes that have been made. And that's his real problem now, is that the way the war was conducted, there were mistakes that occurred in real time on his watch during the presidency that have had a material impact on how the war
Yeah, but the trouble with the thinking here, Robert, I think you got into it with your book, is if you think because the people are behind you and you're popular, you're right. And then when you realize that you're not popular, that tells you you're right. Like he says, I'm Churchill. Well, Churchill won Time Magazine's Man of the Century a few years after leaving the premiership, so he wasn't discarded
I don't
by
think he's
history.
been included into that
Who's
one
he,
about
in his so-called reading of history, who does he find to parallel himself with?
Well, he doesn't select a person. I think he draws strength from the experiences of some of these people like Churchill. But I think that he really believes that fundamental to leadership is making tough choices. You make tough choices, it makes the world uncomfortable. You make the world uncomfortable, you will become unpopular. He thinks it goes with the territory, and he thinks that ultimately those people who've done that are they accrue benefits at the end. That they're finally acquitted by history, and he does believe.
Well,
that
the trouble with that is it's a predicate that if you're unpopular, you must be right. That's the dangerous element here.